Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So, I'm working on a new visual look and feel for these multi-topic shows, but the news does not stop, and we have quite a lot to talk about. There are the reports that EA is begging for help, we've got Steam manipulation, Ubisoft's battle for independence, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Also be sure to check out the channel tomorrow. There's going to be a video that is a deep dive into, well, I'd say a very innovative business strategy from Microsoft and how that could really shift the industry, as well as yesterday's video on the Skyrim Together situation, which unfortunately did not seem to be pushed to people's sub-feeds properly. Thank you, YouTube. Okay, EA begs for help. Look, I purposefully baited a little bit in this one to make a point. Of course, Anthem has been facing significant issues, especially on consoles, where the game is causing extremely serious crashes. Now, for a PC analogy, well, imagine your game just crashing and you being booted back to desktop. Then imagine a game crashing so hard that it blue screens your computer. And then imagine a game crashing so hard that it causes your computer to cut its power in self-defense. Well, many of the Anthem crashes have actually been in the latter category, leaving specifically PS4s in a state where they need to be booted into safe mode, which is something that most users don't know about, and that's led to reports of consoles being bricked. Though it is fair to say that the subsequent database rebuild does involve a lot of drive activity, which is not great for the health of SSDs, especially the lower-end, cheaper ones. Well, EA has acknowledged this issue, and they have asked their users for help, having this to say: "We are currently in the process of gathering information about the PS4 issues so we can determine the root cause. If you are experiencing hard crashes of your console, please reply with the following information: your PlayStation console, so whether it's a PS4, a Slim, or a Pro, your PSN ID, and your crash information. When did the crash take place? Things like that. Are there specific steps you need to take in order to get your PlayStation running again? Have you reported the crash data when prompted by the game?" So, why do this? Well, they're more than likely trying to arm their QA department with more information to help them find out the root cause of this problem faster, likely to work out which part of the game is sparking off what's clearly a cascading set of issues that leads to these catastrophic clashes. Now, many users have chimed in to help, but we've also seen a large wave of ridicule, and I think it's a little bit off base sometimes. They absolutely should be hammered for the quality of their product and the technical state of it, but going after them for trying to solve the problem faster, I don't think that's worthy of ridicule. As always, I like to think, what would it look like if the opposite were to be true? Of them keeping quiet or not acknowledging the problem. Both of those things would result in the fix being slower, wasting further customers' time and money. So yes, Anthem is worthy of ridicule, and just the fact that they asked money for it is a bit ridiculous considering the overall state of the game. But when they are asking their users for more help and things, I mean, a part of it's a bit ridiculous that they have to do that, but I don't think that's something they should be actively attacked for. Again, look at the opposite. If they weren't doing that, it would certainly be worse. Next, we've got to talk about damage in Anthem. And don't worry, this is not an Anthem compilation video. We do have quite a lot of other news, but we do have one more bit of Anthem news. The game's damage numbers seemingly not meaning that much. So here's what happened. A player got a level 45 Masterwork rifle. They found that a bullet did 1184 damage, taking 6 shots to kill an enemy. He then switched to a level 1 version of the same rifle, found that it did 284 damage to the enemy, but killed it in 4 shots instead of 6. That's pretty wild. The high-level rifle needed to do 4,500 damage to kill the enemy, while the low-level one only needed to do 1,000 damage to defeat the same enemy. So this seemingly means that the numbers displayed to players essentially mean just about nothing. Now, from a regular player's perspective, yeah, it's pretty wild, but I think it's something that's quite understandable to people who make games. Often UI and gameplay are fairly detached so that they are not interdependent things. You then have to take into account that a game like Anthem is going to have various different scaling systems, so the numbers seeming wild is likely some sort of display problem, while the underlying problem seems to be based on them having a scaling bug. Of course, if you come from my Warcraft channel, then this stuff will seem pretty familiar. Of course, in Warcraft, we're pretty used to scaling bugs. It's really plagued Blizzard for a while since they've done more scaling, as a recent example, PvP players actually putting on worse gear in order to exploit the scaling in Arena. But, put simply, the more complex these systems are, the higher chance of getting bugs. And unfortunately for BioWare, well, Anthem just does not seem to have been given the QA time that it needed, meaning that loads of bugs that are totally normal parts of development, yeah, they have crept their way into the live title. It's understandable that that's happened, but equally it's unacceptable given how, once again, they're charging money for this game. That said, a fix is actually on the way for this problem. Same goes for the console crashes, which the stability team is currently working on. Basically, a large number of bug fixes, as well as some quality of life fixes, are actually on the way in the next game patch, as detailed by a developer live stream, with it even going as far as to increase masterwork weapon damage, and thankfully for me, also increase interceptor melee damage. Not enough to make me actually come back to the game, but hey, it's certainly work that needs doing. Next, we've got some corporate drama, and that might seem kind of boring, but it is actually sort of interesting and a bit revealing as to just the nature of how a lot of things end up working. So, Ubisoft, since 2015, have had a little bit of a problem, because Vivendi have been trying to basically take control of the company. Now, how did Vivendi do that? Pretty simple, buying shares. Buying loads and loads and loads of shares to the point where, well, they would have more and more control over the company, ideally from Vivendi's perspective, to the point where they could start, appointing people on the board and doing things like that. Now, it started off with them purchasing, I believe in 2015, 6.3% for around 140 million euros of Ubisoft. Now, that actually got to the point of Vivendi owning in the mid-20s percent of Ubisoft stock. Now, Ubisoft vowed to fight this, and it is sort of interesting, is it? Just the idea that you can be the CEO of a company, and you and your board can just be watching your stock getting purchased and thinking, oh dear, we need to fight this problem. Now, fight they did, and they managed to come up with a funding package to essentially buy back their shares from Vivendi. Of course, Tencent appeared, the big Chinese gaming conglomerate. As always, between them and NetEase, they appear in a lot of things. So Tencent were involved in that funding package alongside a Canadian pensions fund. So, pensions funds essentially just managing that, therefore they have a lot of money. So yeah, between Tencent and this Canadian pensions fund, Ubisoft have been able to fully purchase their independence, with Vivendi agreeing that they will not make further stock purchases in Ubisoft for at least the next 5 years. So Ubisoft is free from Vivendi. Now, this is actually something that we've essentially seen happen before, because well, Vivendi used to own Activision Blizzard, most of it, they had a controlling share. So essentially, Activision ended up merging with Vivendi Games, I believe, and it got to the stage where I think in 2013, they had 63%. Of course, Activision Blizzard ended up doing a stock buy, and they essentially secured their independence from Vivendi and grew pretty substantially since that point. So yeah, we're seeing a similar thing go on with Ubisoft, and really we're seeing Vivendi be involved in a lot less of gaming. What does this mean overall? Well, it essentially just means Ubisoft is more independent. They have, more control over their company, and more importantly for them into the future, they don't really risk losing a large amount of control over their company, which very much was something that could have happened. Of course, Activision Blizzard seemed to have had significant issues back when they had when they were like 63% owned by Vivendi. As for what this means for gamers, for the people who play games, it essentially just means Ubisoft are more free to go down whatever path they want. Right now, that does seem to be a path that is fairly in line with what people like. Now, there are a lot of DLC and microtransaction concerns, especially with their single-player titles. I really don't like how it worked with Odyssey, even though I did like Odyssey quite a lot. But, looking at, say, Siege, right, they have a lot of success stories right now, so it probably is a good thing that Ubisoft can continue on, forward without even more corporate oversight. I think one thing is for sure, more Vivendi in Ubisoft probably would not be good for what Ubisoft ends up making. So it likely is good news, and I think an interesting bit of corporate drama, just because the way that, a takeover like that can kind of happen in an antagonistic fashion, such that the CEO of Ubisoft has to start making big statements vowing to fight for independence. I think it is just very interesting. It's the kind of thing, you spice it up a bit and it can actually make for good television. So that's essentially that situation. Ubisoft are free, and let's move on. Next up, we have a story about Steam manipulation, and it's one that might make a bit of sense to you if you think back about your experiences with Steam. Have you ever noticed how the popular upcoming section of Steam can be a bit of a mess? Well, as it turns out, developers are able to quite easily manipulate it, leading to a sizable problem for those who want to use it legitimately, and then of course for Valve who want to manage the whole thing. So Mike Rose, the co-founder of No More Robots, posted about this problem. Basically, as it turns out, developers are able to set the release dates of their games very easily on Steam, and really just change them at will. Of course, games are hard to make. Delays do happen. Misclicks, they suck too. So it's a good thing that the game's actual release is not tied to that release date variable. The release date that seems like, well, the actual release of the game, it seems like you basically just need to click the button for that. But here's the problem though. That release date interfaces with Steam's popular upcoming page in a way that's kind of abusable. The popular upcoming section works based off release date, as set by the developer, and then the number of people who have a game in their wish list. This actually means that developers are able to change their release dates to be closer so that they can essentially rank higher on that list, often pushing down the listings of games that actually do have impending releases. Now, this makes the whole thing a lot less useful for customers and very bad for legitimate developers, and it's quite clearly a short-sighted tool for developers who just choose to misuse it. Now, Valve have said they're very aware of this problem and they're currently discussing how to fix it. Now, look, this is not a major problem, but I think it's another example of the importance of well-designed systems, and that behind almost everything you see online, there is a system, there's an algorithm, there's something that can be reverse engineered and exploited. So I think my main message for this is, always be skeptical. Of course, that's not it for Steam news because, well, there is a game with an extremely controversial theme. The actual theme, though, I'm not going to say because that would actually trigger off a bunch of automated stuff on YouTube that I don't want to trigger off. But you can look at the screen. Now, ultimately, as platform holder, having this on or off is their decision. It's about what Valve as a private company want to do. It is also likely pragmatic, I would say, for them to just remove it, but the problem is that, by doing so, especially if it's down to public pressure, it opens the gate for more mob control and for edgy but less overtly offensive games like, say, Agony to be removed. But this certainly is an awkward situation that they opened themselves up to when they announced that they would pretty much accept anything on the Steam platform. And really, this is the first major test of that policy. Ultimately, though, this game is nothing that new, other than it being on Steam. And if you're alarmed by this game and think it's particularly odd, well, I'd recommend doing a deep dive into all the other stuff that's out there on alternate storefronts. Whether Steam is involved or not, this stuff's a pretty large part of the industry. It's just very insular and underground. Now, personally, I don't think that the game itself seems to have much worth. I think the subject matter, though, can absolutely be tackled by games, just like how it can be tackled by music, film, and television. And I think it would be a net loss to ban the overall topic based only on its worst examples. Still, though, if a platform holder believes that a specific game is a problem for their platform, they're free to ban it, ultimately. If they do that enough, then the market will create its own solution, as long as it's, of course, within the bounds of the law. And guess what? For titles like that, the market already has created its own solution. So it's a massive big story, but ultimately it's really just what is pragmatic for Valve to do. That's essentially the core of it. There's a lot of alarmism, I think, that is based on people not knowing the entire scope of games that are sold online. Next up, we have a quick update on the ArenaNet layoffs. So of around 400 staff, 143 went. That really is quite bad, and unlike the Blizzard job losses, it also significantly impacted their development resources. Why? Well, it seems like a major project was cancelled, and indeed, that higher staff count of 400 is a relatively recent thing, so that really suggests to me that whatever this project was, it had been scaled up but was not meeting expectations and then got axed. Based on what they have said, though, this could actually indicate a shift in focus back towards Guild Wars 2, which might actually be good for the game's current player base, although it certainly is not good news overall. Ultimately, I really hope they pull through. Though they can't just be the Guild Wars 2 studio. There's going to need to be another plan for the future, another project, something else. Who knows what it's going to be, but chances are that the company's survival, now that one project has failed, well, it probably will depend on whatever's next. Next, we've got some quick Nintendo news. So first, a new Pokemon game was announced, which, I don't really mind that much, but what interested me more is Nintendo Switch VR, which has just been announced, and it seems to be being done through their Labo platform. There's actually a lot of potential in this, and I'm always down for more VR in general. However, well, I'm used to VR, and let's just say 60Hz, 720p VR, I think will be very limiting indeed. So as great as it is to see the Switch do this, I am basically still left wondering, like, why did they just repackage an Nvidia Shield, which at the time of the Switch's release was already pretty old? Ultimately, a Switch Pro with a Tegra X2 would likely be ideal, especially for docked play and virtual reality content, and the fact that they're testing the waters here makes me think, yeah, if they really want to do VR, they're going to need better hardware. If they want a better docked experience, they're going to need better hardware. It just makes me wonder if after the reported Switch Lite, they're just going to go for a Switch Pro or something that essentially has a Tegra X2 in it. Okay, moving on past that though, we do have some Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order news. And you know what, I'm actually quite excited for this game. Now, I'm not really into Star Wars, but I know KOTOR was of course pretty great, and it is a franchise that has a long history of quality video games. While the modern movies honestly are just not that interesting to me, everything that I've heard of about the IP tells me that the extended universe content is where really a lot of the best stories happen. So yeah, I absolutely am quite excited to see a narrative-driven action-adventure game from a studio like Respawn. Now, we've got two recent updates. So the first one is that Chris Avellone is apparently working on the project. Now, he is a fairly legendary designer and writer. He worked on KOTOR 2, Fallout New Vegas, Prey, Planescape, Torment, and many, many more games. So his involvement certainly does bode well here, and we're also, the second bit of news is that we're going to get our first glimpse at this game during Star Wars Celebration on the 13th of April. And you know what? I'm actually pretty excited. Respawn did a great job with the Titanfall 2 campaign. Now, Respawn Entertainment, of course, spawned out of Infinity Ward, with many of their staff working in Call of Duty 1, 2, 4, and Modern Warfare 2. Now, Call of Duty 4 is especially good for its campaign, and that might seem wild to those who have not played it and associate Call of Duty with, you know, the 14-year-olds and stuff, but it was a pretty masterfully executed contemporary story with a strong anti-war message that really was pretty great. So Respawn, they might not come to mind first as being the narrative people, but you know what? I really think they could pull this one off. And then finally, just before I went to record this video, Wrath was announced. So it's 3D Realms and a bunch of other people working together to do a retro sort of Quake-like shooter. You know what? I'm really interested in it. I don't have that much else to say about it, just that I loved Doom 2016. I can't wait for Doom Eternal, and yeah, having this game exist with mod tools on launch definitely seems to be quite interesting to me. Also, unlike, I believe, Strafe, I think that was the game, maybe it was called Strife. It was the sort of Doom-like game that was like procedurally generated. Well, I don't think this one is procedurally generated, and that should mean that unlike that other game, it'll have things such as level design, which would be quite nice indeed. So yeah, that's definitely a game that I'm looking forward to, and that really is it for today's news recap. This is going to be a series of videos that I formalize more as time goes on. A lot of this channel really has just been making content that I find interesting, but yeah, I obviously want to polish it up and make it better. So we'll likely work out a format for this. Maybe we'll have it so that it happens on Tuesdays and Thursdays or Tuesdays and Fridays or something like that. So just let me know down below in the comments, what would you like from a sort of gaming news recap show in terms of tone and, you know, look, feel, that kind of stuff. I'd be interested to hear. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, and with that, I will see you next time.